What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Earlier this week, we dropped our first redraft rankings of the summer, starting with the wide receiver position. We're doing the same thing here today, except we're going on over to those running backs. So make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel. That way you don't miss any future videos. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these running backs. All right, so as you can see, I got the tier maker pulled up on the screen today to get through all 36 of my top 36 rankings. We got 7 tiers. I've broken them down for you guys so you can kind of see how I'm viewing the players in those tiers. But let's kick it off in tier 1. I have this as the elite RB1s, and there's 3 guys in this tier. We'll start with Saquon Barkley. There's really not much to say about Saquon Barkley right now after last season. He had the most yards after contact in a season since 2016, had 7 40-plus yard runs. That was more, just for context, more than Todd Gurley had ever in his career, and had 12 long rushing touchdowns with Philadelphia, had 13 total during his time with the New York Giants. So obviously this was a much better situation. Saquon Barkley, he is locked into a workload here in Philadelphia, and he's in an elite offense. Let's not overthink it. Repeating at the RB1 is hard, but Saquon Barkley, he is, let's just say, generational at this point. So let's go to my number 2 guy. My number 2 guy is Bijan Robinson. He had the highest rush success rate ever last year with 60.2%. That was with 250 plus carries, as well as 17 fantasy points per game in 10 of his final 11 games. That was only matched by 2019 Christian McCaffrey, and he had the 3rd most red zone touches among all running backs last season. So this is a young player who is in a proven situation and in a rising offense. We probably should be taking him as the RB2 off the board. And then the last player in this tier, it's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs for the Detroit Lions. Led the NFL last year in explosive run rate. 10% of his carries went for 15 plus yards. He had 20 total touchdowns on 302 touches and averaged 20.9 fantasy points per game versus the top half defenses in the NFL. This is an elite player who's tied to the NFL's highest scoring offense, a top 3 guys in my ranking, and probably one of the safest round 1 picks you can make in your fantasy football drafts. Let's move on to my tier 2. My tier 2 is those solid running back ones. I got quite a few guys. We'll kick it off with my number 4 guy. It's going to be Christian McCaffrey. Last year, he averaged 21 touches and 115 total yards per game as a 49er. Now, obviously, he only played in 4 games during 2024 after going 101 in most drafts and probably disappointing a lot of people last season. Now, he is going into his age 29 season. I do project that he still has that elite workload. He's probably going to be on a top 5 offense in football. San Francisco, Kyle Shanahan, they just seem to get it done most years. I think he's a risky, kind of high reward, high risk type of pick that depends on your tolerance in fantasy football drafts. If you don't like the risk, you don't want to potentially miss out on your first round pick, you avoid Christian McCaffrey, but I think he's a player that's definitely worthy of a top 5 running back selection in your fantasy football leagues. Let's move on over to my number 5 guy. It is going to be the rookie Ashton Jeanty for the Las Vegas Raiders. He had 29 rushing touchdowns in college and a 20% team target share in his final collegiate season. He was drafted 6th overall by the Las Vegas Raiders and is the highest running back pick in the NFL draft since Saquon Barkley. This is a rare prospect who has elite production, the receiving profile, he has a young age. All of those things lead to massive workloads in your rookie season, and I think this is going to be an improved Las Vegas Raiders team with Pete Carroll, Geno Smith, and some of these other guys. So Ashton Jeanty, probably a top 5 pick in your redraft leagues at the running back position, and somebody you're going to have to pick as a fringe round 1 type of player. So let's go to my RB6. My RB6 is going to be Achane. I think this is a player who has a ton of upside. The RB3 in fantasy points per game last year with 19.5 fantasy points per game. That was when Tua Tagovailoa was on the football field. Now, the issue was when Tua Tagovailoa was not on the football field, he only averaged 7.7 fantasy points per game. So it was the tale of 2 seasons for Achane. However, he led all running backs in receptions and first read targets. He had a 29% target rate when Tua played, and he has that elite receiving upside that we want to see out of those running backs in fantasy football. So not necessarily a traditional running back, but I think he's a big play type of running back one who has league winning type of upside. Moving on to my running back 7 here, I am going to go with Derrick Henry. This is a player who had 2,000 plus scrimmage yards and 18 touchdowns in year 9 of his NFL career. He averaged 19.2 fantasy points per game in wins and 9.8 in losses over the course of his career. And this is a team that we project to keep winning here in Baltimore. So I do tend to think that this is going to be another good season from Derrick Henry. Now, he does have some low reception upside in this offense. Obviously, he's going to be tied to this top 10 offense for the Ravens, so you do have the touchdown potential as well. Still locking him in as a top 10 running back in my rankings, especially if Baltimore is going to have another good season, which I think most of us are projecting that to be the truth. Let's go on to my running back 8. My running back 8 is going to be Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. He had 520 rushing yards in his final 3 games of the NFL season last year, so if you had him on your fantasy football team, he probably helped you win a fantasy championship. Now, that was good for the 5th most all-time in those final 3 games. He had 38% of his 2024 fantasy points that came in those 3 games, so a lot of the production late for Jonathan Taylor. Now, that said, Jonathan Taylor, he ranked bottom 5 in missed tackles and yards after carry per attempt. That's something to keep an eye on. I think this is a player who's probably closer to running back 10 than he is the running back 5 these days, but I do think he needs a big Colts season to shine, and so is that going to happen with Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson? Not really sure. Somebody who's probably a little bit riskier in this tier. Let's go to my last player in this tier. I want to go with Bucky Irving, who comes in as my running back 9. He was the running back 7 from week 10 on last year. He averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game, and that accounted for 30% of the Bucs' total touches in the second half of the season. Now, he was a top 10 player in yards per carry, success rate, missed tackles, explosive runs, you name it. Bucky Irving was probably towards the top of the list. And even though Rachaad White still is looming in this backfield, I do think that the year 1 breakout from Bucky Irving does kind of make a strong case for this to continue here in year 2 of his NFL career. Let's move on to my tier 3. My tier 3 is going to be those solid RB2s that I do think have an RB1 pathway if some things break right. We're going to kick it off here with my running back 10. That's going to be Josh Jacobs. He was the running back 5 last year in fantasy. He was 5th in total touches, and he scored 12 touchdowns in his final 8 games and led the NFL with 14 rushing touchdowns inside of the 10-yard line. So the Packers offense, I do believe it's going to be a strong one this year. The touchdowns, they may swing a little bit more towards the passing game, so there is some possible regression here on tap for Josh Jacobs. Still, I think he's a fringe running back 1 with minor regression risk, so if you want to bake that into your draft selections, make sure you do that. But he's still coming in for me as a top 10 guy in my ranking. Let's go to my running back 11. I do have Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. This is a player who has had 31 touchdowns in his last 28 games. He led the NFL last year in red zone touches, and he's the Rams' go-to option whenever they get inside of that 5-yard line. This is a player who probably is a little bit more volume-based over that explosiveness at this point in time, but Sean McVay, he trusts him. He keeps giving him the workload, and despite them bringing in other guys every single NFL draft season, it does seem like they just keep going back to Kyren Williams, so there is a slight draft discount on him right now because of some of that narrative with Jarquez Hunter and Blake Corum and all of these other guys, but I still view Kyren Williams as a low-end running back 1 and somebody I'm still comfortable having on my fantasy football team and drafting right now at a discount in drafts. Let's go on over to my running back 12. It's going to be Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. He was the running back 5 in fantasy football from week 9 on last year. He averaged an 86% snap share after that Zach Moss injury, and he averaged 24.4 opportunities per game in that span. Now, he had 54 receptions, which did boost his value, especially in those PPR formats, but the efficiency as the receiver was a little bit weak for him last season. I think this is still a running back, though, that's probably going to be in a workhorse role early on. He's on an elite offense, and I do think that gives him some clear running back 1 upside, despite the fact that I do believe Taj Brooks is a dynasty darling, but for redraft purposes, Chase Brown should be pretty good early on in the NFL season, probably for the majority of the year. Go to running back 13. I'm going to have Breece Hall here for the New York Jets. He was a top 5 player in snap rate and yards after the catch per attempt since 2022. Now he has 270 plus opportunity workload upside here in this offense with an elite pass catching ability that does make him a little bit of a difference maker for your fantasy football teams. Now, Fields' check down tendency should help him maintain some of those targets. Had the second highest check down rate of all quarterbacks over the last couple of seasons. And I think Breece Hall is a high-end running back 2 with a pathway to running back 1 production if the Jets offense finally clicks, but that's still a big what if because that's been a question for multiple years now for the New York Jets. Let's go to my last player in this tier. I want to talk about James Cook, who comes in as my running back 14. This is a player who scored 16 rushing touchdowns in 2024, despite having fewer yards and snaps than he did in 2023. 43% of his fantasy points came from those touchdowns, and so that 7.7% touchdown rate is very likely unsustainable here in 2025. He is a massive regression candidate. I can't lie to you there, but the role still should be solid. There's just probably going to be a little bit of a production dip here in 2025, and the contract dispute is still something that's ongoing, but I don't expect him to miss any games. It's still something, though, we should be keeping an eye on as we get into NFL training camps. Let's move on to my tier 4. My tier 4 is those reliable RB2s. I'm going to kick it off with my running back 15. It's going to be Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. This is a player who led all running backs in expected fantasy points per game and target share during the 2024 season. He had 89 targets and 500 plus receiving yards, which did help him finish as a top 10 running back on the year. There's no signs of that receiving role changing under new head coach Kellen Moore. And even though he is an aging running back, I still think he's a strong PPR type of running back too, even if he's in a rebuilding offense, because he should remain that number 2 receiving option opposite Chris Olave. Let's move on to Kenneth Walker, who comes in as my running back 16. This is a player who averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game last year before he had that injury. He saw a big jump in his receiving usage as well, going to 5 targets per game. Now, he was ranked number 1 in forced missed tackle rate last year, and new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak brings a more run-heavy tendency here to the Seattle Seahawks, so that is definitely something I'm paying attention to. I think he's a solid running back too for your teams with upside if his health can hold, but health has always kind of been a concern for Kenneth Walker, so we'll see how that holds up over the course of this year. Let's move on to my next running back. It's going to be Chuba Hubbard. He comes in as 17. He was the running back 7 last year from weeks 3 through 16. If he just eliminated those first 2 games, he had a damn good year. Averaged 17 fantasy points per game, scored 10 rushing touchdowns despite playing in one of the NFL's worst offenses, and he does remain the lead back in this offense over Rico Dowdle in a favorable scheme with Dave Canales, who has utilized him to the best of his ability. I think he's an undervalued RB2 who has sneaky double-digit touchdown potential and has the chance again this year to outperform his ADP by the time the season wraps up here. So let's go on to my next running back, 18. It's going to be James Conner. Conner is one of just 3 running backs to average 15 plus carries and 3 catches per game, and he topped 1,000 rushing yards for the second straight season at age 30. Now, the Cardinals, they still are going to be leaning heavily on him as this offensive centerpiece to help Kyler Murray, to help Marvin Harrison Jr., just really to help this engine go for the Arizona Cardinals. And I think he's being perpetually overlooked here in fantasy football drafts. Still a safe running back to play. Maybe you don't really like him because of the age, but until the wheels fall off, I think we can keep relying on James Conner. Let's go to running back 19. This is going to be a player that I'm kind of flag planting at this point in time. Isaiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs. He averaged 42% of the team's total opportunities before his early season injury in 2024, and then he rushed the recovery, returned in December, and still held a strong usage role at that point in time. Now, obviously, he didn't play that well, and that's kind of a memory that's burned into a lot of people's brains. There's still some very real touchdown upside in this offense with the high-powered Chiefs team. I do think he's a great value running back too, and I think he's very overlooked from a volume perspective. People are down, people are out on Isaiah Pacheco, but I've been flag planting him to start the offseason. I think he's one of the best values in fantasy football drafts and still a player I'm comfortable to have as my running back too. Let's go on to my last player in this tier. I'm going to go with Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. He averaged 23.3 fantasy points per game over the first 11 games of the NFL season last year, but in the back half, he fell to just 6 fantasy points per game in that final month of the NFL season. He ranked bottom 10 in forced missed tackles and success rate last year, and this Texans offensive line is a little bit of a concern. However, the volume probably isn't going anywhere. It still remains as a massive workload here for Joe Mixon. So he's a player that I think is a little bit of risk reward, probably a volume play as your running back too, but there are some major efficiency red flags with him and potentially an injury that he's dealing with at this point in time. We want to see that get healthier over the next couple of months as we get into training camps, but still very risky, high reward type of guy with the volume play here for Joe Mixon. Let's move on to my tier 5. My tier 5 is running back 2s that I think have some upside to potentially outplay their current ADPs. First one I'm going to talk about is going to be number 21, Amarion Hampton, rookie for the Los Angeles Chargers. This is a player who had 1,500 plus rushing yards and 15 touchdowns in back-to-back college seasons there for the North Carolina Tar Heels. He was drafted 22nd overall by the Los Angeles Chargers and has elite draft capital for a rookie running back. He's a big body back. I think he has those workhorse traits that we look for, and I think he's passable as a receiver. Maybe not an elite receiver, but he has enough of the receiving chops to get by here. Probably a guy that I think we can view as a running back too, maybe a flex option to start the year, but we could see him become a league winner over the course of the second half of the season, especially if Najee Harris kind of fades away like we've seen Najee Harris do in years past. I'm going to go to another rookie running back coming in at 22 for me. It's Quinshon Judkins for the Cleveland Browns. This is a player who had 45 rushing touchdowns in 3 college seasons, and he was surprisingly good in his receiving metrics showed that he can do that at the next level. So that's something I'm pretty excited about. I think he's expected right now to be an early down and a goal line option in Stefanski's run heavy scheme. Obviously, this is a team that also added Dylan Sampson, so we'll see how they utilize him as well. But I think this is a player who's probably going to see 250 touches, even though this is a bad offense. Probably touchdowns and the volume are going to be the things that keep him relevant. And I think he's an underrated running back to play, especially in standard and half PPR formats. Let's move on to another running back. We're going to number 23, David Montgomery. This is a player who averaged 10.5 fantasy points per game in 82% of his games since 2023. He has an ultra reliable RB2 type of floor. This is a player who nearly matched Jahmyr Gibbs last year as well in receiving stats before he got injured. So this is a player who dominates the rushing work when the Lions have the lead, and let's just be real, that is pretty often for the Detroit Lions. I think he's a very boring option that people are probably sick of, name fatigue at this point, but he is a very effective running back too on a good team in the NFL, and I think he's an easy value at his current draft cost. Moving on to my running back 24, I'm going to have Trevion Henderson, rookie running back for the New England Patriots. This is a player who has a very explosive profile. He was a second-round rookie with major PPR appeal, and I think he has a lot of pass-catching ability that you can lean on in fantasy formats. Now, the thing is, he's going to be competing with Ramondre Stevenson to start the year. I think he offers a lot more juice than a guy like Ramondre does, especially in a thin Patriots offense that needs some playmakers on this team. And I truly do believe that Trevion Henderson could be a guy that is the number 2 or the number 3 receiving option on this team by the end of the year, and probably is a top 2 player in receiving targets in this offense. Now, because of that, I think he's probably a fringe running back too in PPR leagues, and I think he has potential to grow into a lead role, especially if there was an injury to a guy like Stevenson, or if Stevenson looks the way he did last year, which was very, very unimpressive. Now let's move on to my last guy in this tier, coming in at 25. It's going to be RJ Harvey, rookie running back for the Denver Broncos. So lots of rookies in this RB2s with upside tier. Talking about Harvey, this is a player who had 22 touchdowns at UCF, plus he had the explosive traits on his metric profile, his prospect profile, and showed that he also has some legit receiving upside as well. So the Broncos, they went out, they spent a day 2 pick on him. That's obviously very significant. It signals that they have a clear belief here in his talent. Now the problem is he probably has a little bit of early down competition here from J.K. Dobbins, but I do believe that that pass catching role, that pass game role for the Denver Broncos is very safely RJ Harvey. So this is a player that I think is risky. He's very exciting as a pick, and I think he's probably going to see a lot of high value touches in this offense, and definitely a player I still believe, despite the addition to J.K. Dobbins in Denver, has the potential to outscore his ADP here in 2025. Let's move on to tier 6. Tier 6 is those running back threes. I'm going to kick it off here with Caleb Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a running back that has that prototypical size, 6'1", 224 pounds. He has the elite college production, had 76% of Iowa's yardage last year in 2024. Very high dominator rating as well, 52%. That's the highest of any running back in this class. Now, he is a downhill runner in a system that produced 4 straight 1,000-yard running back seasons, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Caleb Johnson outcarry Jaylen Warren and finish as a surprise running back too by the end of the year. However, I think this offense is probably going to lack a lot of explosiveness with Aaron Rodgers and some of the lack of weapons that they have here in Pittsburgh. So for now, as I'm drafting him in these drafts to start the year, probably more a running back 3 than those guys in that tier above him. Let's go to my running back 27. I'm going to put DeAndre Swift here. This is a player who's coming off of a career high 305 touches, but the efficiency was very rough for DeAndre Swift last year, and he was dead last in zone success rate now. And yes, he's been a top 24 fantasy running back in 5 straight seasons, but this new regime here in Chicago didn't draft him. Yes, they have time with him when they were there in Detroit with Ben Johnson, but I still don't have a lot of confidence in DeAndre Swift. I think Roschon Johnson could probably push for more work as the season goes on, especially because we've seen Ben Johnson use 2 running backs in his systems before. And even though DeAndre Swift does have that athletic type of profile, I think he's kind of limited as an NFL running back. And I do think that makes him more of a flex play or a running back 3 play than he is really anything else here for fantasy football purposes. Let's move on to running back 28. I want to talk about Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. This is a player who last year averaged 20 opportunities per game, but he still barely ever cracked the top 24 running backs on a week-by-week basis. This was a historic lack of touchdowns despite the solid usage that we've seen. He's probably on a bottom tier type of offense here in the NFL, with the Tennessee Titans likely going to be relying on the development of a rookie quarterback here in Cam Ward. And I think that Tony Pollard does face a real threat from Tajay Spears as a potential 1A, 1B type of backfield backfield split. Now, the volume that he was seeing last year, it does probably keep him in this RB3 flex type of range, but I do think his ceiling is severely capped in this offense with his backfield mate, Tyjae Spears. So probably a player that we should be drafting outside of the top 25 running backs. Let's move on and talk about my running back 29. It's going to be Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. This is a player who was efficient as ever last year. He averaged 4.5 yards per carry and 8 yards per reception, even at the age of 29. Now, the Vikings, they did bring him back on a 2-year deal, but they also added Jordan Mason to this backfield as well. I still think he should be the lead pass catcher on this offense, but I think the red zone work could get split with a guy like Jordan Mason, and I think Jordan Mason could be the early down grinder here. So because of the added competition in this backfield, I think he's more of a reliable running back 3, a flex that has a little bit of upside in the receiving game, but probably more volatile in 2025 than he was there in 2024. Let's move on to my RB30. I want to talk about Brian Robinson Jr. This is a very solid running back, but you're never going to be excited clicking draft on a guy like Brian Robinson Jr. He averaged 11.4 fantasy points per game last year. He did have some heavy red zone involvement in a good offense as well. 42 red zone carries, 7 touchdowns inside the 10, and was clearly trusted by Cliff Kingsbury in this offense. Now, like I said, he doesn't really offer too much in the passing game, but the volume and the role are stable enough that he's probably going to be this boring, safe type of pick that lacks a lot of upside. You know, it's probably the fantasy equivalent of eating your vegetables. Nobody really wants to do it, but it's not a bad thing. You just have to do it sometimes, even if you don't want to. So that's how I'm viewing Brian Robinson right now for fantasy football drafts. Let's go to my last player in this tier, creeping into my RB3s. It's going to be Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, this is a player who I think fell very, very hard in 2024. He had a top 3 season there in 2023 and followed that up by averaging just 3.7 yards per carry last year. He was kind of part of a 2-man backfield with Tank Bigsby. Now it's a 3-man backfield with Bashal Tutin thrown in there as well. I think he's still a capable pass catcher, and he is a good scheme fit with Liam Cohen in this offense, but it's really hard to trust him as a workhorse after what we saw last season. This is a player that I think is a very high-risk flex, but I do think he has some bounce back potential, especially if the usage stabilizes and Liam Cohen starts to trust Travis Etienne. We could see him bounce back into top 24 form, and I wouldn't be very surprised by that, but there's a ton of risk with Travis Etienne as well. Now, moving on to my final tier, this is going to be those flex plays. Coming in as my running back 32, I got Najee Harris of the Los Angeles Chargers. He did bounce back in 2024 with some better efficiency numbers, but he's now playing second fiddle to that first-round pick in Omarion Hampton like we talked about. He's probably going to start the year in this 1A, 1B type of split that I do think could fade as the season goes on, as Omarion Hampton gets a little bit more involved into an NFL offense. Probably going to fade Najee Harris off of the football field a little bit more. So early in the year, he's probably going to be dependable, not very dynamic, and you're probably going to be on the wrong side of a backfield takeover here. So it does make it kind of hard to draft a guy like Najee Harris unless you're drafting him to pair with Hampton, or you're going to be punting that running back and taking a guy who has some upside, maybe a guy like Caleb Johnson, Harvey, Henderson, one of those guys where you need some early season production, and if he does fade away, it's hopefully timed right with a breakout from one of those guys in that tier above him. Let's move on to Jaylen Warren, who comes in as my running back 33. He averaged 67 yards per game over the second half of the year last year, and he was tendered as a valued piece with that second round tender by the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's viewed by the team as a lead back right now. I say lead back, quote unquote, because that's kind of what they're telling us. I just don't believe that's going to be the case once the NFL season comes along. Like I said, Caleb Johnson, he's kind of going to be looming here as this early down threat. There's still no receiving touchdowns for Jaylen Warren in his career, which feels wild for a guy who's deemed as a pass-catching running back to never receive a receiving touchdown. But I do think he could lose some touches very quickly in this offense, making him a very shaky, a very risky flex play, and probably somebody that I'm not really going to be targeting in my drafts. Let's move on to my running back 34. It's going to be Tyrone Tracy. This is a player who was a surprise breakout as a 5th-round rookie wide receiver who turned into a running back, finishing as the running back 15 from week 5 on of the NFL season last year. 1,123 total yards was the 5th best ever for a 24-year-old rookie running back, and he does face some competition this year from Cam Scatabo, and especially as a guy who's going to be carrying very little long-term job security over the next couple of weeks as we progress through the NFL season. It's tough for me to trust a guy like Tyrone Tracy. So he's probably a trap pick, maybe a potential trap pick for fantasy football if the Giants offense sputters and they kind of start leaning on a guy like Scatabo because they just want to see what they got out of this guy. So tough for me to click Tracy as well, but let's talk about his teammate. I just brought up his name, Cam Scatabo. Tough for me to click Scatabo too. This is a player who had a great pass catching profile. He He had 21% of the team target share at ASU, and he had very good college production. The thing is, he fell to day 3 in the NFL draft, very likely slowing his path to opportunity because those day 3 running backs, it just takes a little bit longer for them to get onto the football field and get a majority of that workload. Now, he's going to be battling Tracy and Singletary as well in a crowded backfield, and I think this is going to be a mediocre backfield at best too. Probably on one of the NFL's lower tiered offenses. I just don't believe this is going to be a high-powered offense either, despite Malik Neighbors being there. It just feels like this is a team that's kind of stuck in neutral, and it's hard to trust the running backs in that type of offense. He's a player that's probably intriguing to stash. You're probably not going to be plugging him into your lineup early on in the season, but as the year gets on, maybe they start to fade out a guy like Tyrone Tracy and Scatabo gets a little bit more involved, and who knows, maybe this team does take a step forward if Jackson Dart gets onto the football field, but it's still tough to trust that as well. So like I said, Tracy's a hard click, Scatabo's a hard click for me. I'm really not excited to click either of these guys in my drafts. Let's go to the last player in this rankings video. It is going to be number 36, just creeping in, Ramondre Stevenson. Look, he was given a surprising 4-year deal last year, and I was just shocked when I saw that news because he was coming off of a very rough year of fumbles, injuries, a whole bunch of other stuff as well. The efficiency, it tanked completely across the board for Ramondre Stevenson, and now he faces competition from a rookie running back that I thought was very, very impressive in college in Trevion Henderson. He's still probably going to be projected as the lead back, especially day 1, week 1 coming into the NFL season, but I think that role can shrink very rapidly once Trevion Henderson gets involved, and this is a player who's probably a fringe flex option that we probably are not going to want to have on our rosters as the season goes on, so probably going to be passing on clicking Ramondre Stevenson for better upside options later on as well. So there you have it, folks. That is my top 36 running back rankings for redraft leagues right now as we approach the NFL season. Obviously, these are going to update and change throughout the next couple of months, so hopefully you guys are subscribed to this channel. That way, when those updates hit, these other videos drop, you guys will get those in your subscription feed. If you like today's rankings, make sure you hit the like button for me down below. It is the best free way to show this channel some support, and let me know in the comments, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Let's have a conversation. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on how you're viewing some of these players for the 2025 season. And last but not least, make sure you go join our Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with your fantasy football teams 24/7, 365, whether that be dynasty, redraft, best ball, you name it. There's 500 plus people in there talking every single day, wanting to chat some fantasy football with you. So make sure you go join that. Like I said, free to join, no risk in doing that. But with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today. So I will see you on our next episode. But until then, peace out.